is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. EU ministers clash over how to rein in soaring energy prices as emergency talks end in division over what to do next.
Our other headlines: China and the Taliban hold their first high-level talks since the group seized control of Afghanistan.
Tesla overtakes the competition, becoming the first car maker in history to be valued at $1 trillion. Plus,
we have never seen these works that our ancestors made before. How can you inspire others without these objects?
A 129-year journey nears its end after France agrees to return looted treasures to Benin. EU countries have failed to agree on a united response to surging energy prices following an emergency meeting of government ministers.
Divisions are deepening over a long-term plan, with some countries seeking an overhaul of the EU's energy laws and others firmly opposed.
Well, our correspondent Giles Gibson is watching the story for us in Brussels. Giles, what, if anything, was agreed at today's meeting?
Well, Jamie, this meeting was billed as an emergency meeting, but we didn't get a lot of short-term measures coming out of the end of it. The European Commission has said it's going to scrutinise the electricity market here in the EU. They're going to report back with initial findings in the middle of November, and then there's going to be a full comprehensive report due in the spring of 2022. The problem for consumers here in Europe, of course, is that they are already facing higher energy bills, and those bills are only going to go up as we head further into the coldest winter months. Really, this lack of a combined at EU-level response to this energy crisis is reflective of the fact that we have these two camps emerging here in Europe amongst member states. The first, led by the Spanish, is really insisting that there needs to be pretty drastic reforms to things like the wholesale electricity market here in Europe. The other, which includes Germany, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, says that those sorts of reforms are not necessary at this stage. Take a listen to the energy ministers from Spain and Luxembourg speaking after that meeting.
We believe the functioning of the electricity market, the gas market and the emission rights market must be revised, reviewed and analysed. Therefore, Spain has a non-paper with strong proposals in these three main blocks that were highlighted in last week's European Council.
I think that the Spanish government is over-promising by saying joint gas procurement will solve the crisis. What will solve the crisis is efficiency investments, continue with reliable investments into renewables, and what Spain needs most is interconnections.
Giles, what other factors might be driving this?
Well, of course, the country that supplies almost 50% of Europe's natural gas is outside of the European Union, and that's Russia. A close advisor to US President Joe Biden was actually asked about whether Russian President Vladimir Putin is using natural gas as a weapon, and Amos Hochstein, that advisor, said that I think we are getting close to that. This really is a veiled reference to this accusation that Vladimir Putin is using natural gas to squeeze Europe to try to get certain things out of them, things like getting approval from EU regulators here in Brussels, as well as German authorities for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. If you ask Vladimir Putin, though, he says he is not trying to squeeze Europe in any way, and that Russia will increase supply if it is asked to do so.
Giles Gibson in Brussels, thank you very much. Oil prices are edging towards new highs thanks to a global supply shortage and strong demand across the United States. Brent crude oil has hit $86 per barrel. Goldman Sachs is predicting Brent will push above its year-end forecast of $90 per barrel. Meanwhile, the chief executive of the world's largest asset manager, BlackRock, says there's a high probability it could hit $100 per barrel by the year's end. China says it's studying plans to stabilize coal prices. Authorities say a new mechanism will look into the costs and profitability of the sector based on a benchmark price plus a floating range. China's coal prices hit historic highs last week. The prices have since come down after the government said it would intervene, but remain more than 130% up on the year to date. Australia is pledging net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050, but says it will not legislate that goal, instead relying on consumers and companies to drive reductions. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has drawn criticism over this plan, which does not include an end to the country's fossil fuel industry or an emissions target for 2030, a key objective of next week's COP26 climate summit. Australia is one of the world's leading emitters of coal and gas.
The International Energy Agency has released 12 recommendations to help the global transition to clean energy. It's warned the shift must be people-focused and inclusive, or risk failure. It comes as world leaders are preparing to meet in Glasgow next week for those climate talks, which are seen as crucial to addressing climate change. Well, our correspondent Ross Cullen is in Paris. Ross, this report was really people-focused. Why is that important?
Yes, Julia, it is all to do with the fact that when governments often announce investment in infrastructure, when they announce investment in wind energy or solar energy, try to reduce their emissions, they are policy recommendations that we often get from international organisations such as the International Energy Agency, which is headquartered here in Paris. This report is different because it focuses on people, saying that aside from all the policy recommendations in terms of infrastructure and emissions, you need to focus on the communities that will be negatively affected by this transition. You need to support workers and make sure there are well-paid jobs. Listening to the news briefing just a short time ago, the International Energy Agency unveiling this Global Commission's report, Cristiana Figueres, a Costa Rican politician, said that it is very easy to measure the transition that's going on across the world to try to deal with the climate emergency. Very easy to measure it in terms of megawatts, tons and numbers of emissions, but it is harder to measure, but we should measure it in terms of people, employees and people who are negatively affected, the communities at risk of the effect of climate change. Fatih Birol, who's the head of the IEA, he said that it is an absolute priority to focus on communities that will be negatively affected. He said it's all very well that governments might have a hydrogen strategy, but do they have a people strategy to support their communities, to support their workers? We did also hear from Senator Joe Manchin. He's the chair of the Senate Energy Committee, a Democratic senator from West Virginia, which is a big fossil fuel producing state in the US, and he said they have been doing the heavy lifting. The workers who might have been focused on, employed by polluting sectors in the past, we need to support them. We can't just throw them to one side. We need to ensure that everybody is involved, everybody is supported by this transition, and we don't just focus on the bigger goals in terms of policy, sustainable agriculture, emissions reduction, trying to reduce the number of polluting factories and increase the number of wind farms and solar farms. What does that all mean for the employees? That was the real focus of this report.
OK, so people are the focus, but there were 12 key recommendations. What stood out for you? What are the highlights?
These recommendations include making sure that there is gender and social inclusion, making sure we hear the voices of young people, particularly because this is something that the climate emergency that is not going to go away quickly. Countries are setting their recommendations for 2050, 2060, and so the current generation that are growing up now, we need to hear those voices. So the recommendation is that governments have that policy in place to specifically listen to young people, also to make sure that they are supporting those workers who are being negatively impacted, already working in contaminating sectors, in polluting sectors. Their jobs might be lost, their sectors are going to be affected, so making sure they have a plan in place, each nation, to deal with those factors. also supporting the idea of more public participation, more dialogue to ensure that the public understand what's happening, and these are not just big goals that are spoken about at summits and in meetings between politicians, that the public really feel engaged. So these are recommendations which weren't these policy recommendations that we often see, suggestions of how to reduce your emissions, Juliet. They were more suggestions on how governments can try to really put people at the heart of the climate transition.
Be interesting to see what traction these recommendations get at the COP summit next week. Ross Cullen in Paris, thank you.
Well, plans by countries to cut carbon emissions are still falling far short of what's required to avert a climate crisis. That's according to a new report by the United Nations. Current commitments to cut greenhouse gases will see temperatures rise by 2.7 degrees this century, with serious consequences for global warming, according to the United Nations Environment Programme. The COP26 Global Climate Summit will be held in Scotland, of course, next month, with Prime Minister Boris Johnson warning it's touch and go if agreement can be reached among members on policy change.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a view from the office window that's out of this world. Jeff Bezos plans to build a space business park.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
What does a sustainable future mean? What can we do with millions of tons of plastics, glass, food, clothes piling up on our planet? CGTN Europe looks at what consumers, businesses, and governments are doing to offer a better world to generations to come. Trash or Treasure on CGTN Europe and online at cgtn.com.
Climate change is happening right now. World leaders prepare for vital talks that will change the course of humanity. Action could save millions of lives. Failure could cost many more. Do they have the will to act quickly? Does the planet have the time to wait? Follow full coverage from the COP26 climate talks here on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang has met Taliban leaders in Doha. It's the first high-level engagement between the two sides since the group took control of Afghanistan in August, following the withdrawal of US troops. Adel El-Marouki reports.
There are intensive series of meetings that the Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang has been holding with Taliban officials in Doha in Qatar, where the Taliban office has been based, and it has become, with the latest development in Afghanistan, the diplomatic base for the Taliban government. He has also spoken with the acting Deputy Prime Minister of the Taliban government in Afghanistan, Mullah Abdul Ghani Sardar, and they talked about all the possible cooperation platforms that China and Afghanistan can collaborate with. The Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that he stressed that China has never intervened into any country's domestic affairs, and he stressed this has been always the case with Afghanistan as well, and all that China is interested in is to see the will and desires of the Afghani people become a reality and take place smoothly. He also highlighted the challenges, the four main challenges that Afghanistan is facing. First of all, the humanitarian and economic crises that are ongoing, the great threat of fighting terrorism, and of course the new know-how for governance of a state and a country like Afghanistan. And China offered to help with all of these four aspects, especially the humanitarian file, where Wang Yi stressed that the Chinese cooperation, support and aid will continue to the Afghanistani people no matter what. They've also talked briefly about what will the future be holding for the bilateral relations between these two governments. And also Wang Yi highlighted China's concern with the Eastern Turkestan Islamic group, which is by the UN Security Council considered a terrorist group and is raising concerns to the Chinese government. Overall, from their part, the Taliban government confirmed their willingness to have friendly and strong relations with China and cooperate whenever possible.
Meanwhile, China's president has spoken to his French counterpart. Xi Jinping and Emmanuel Macron agreed to continue high-level communication and cooperate on several areas, including biodiversity and trade. Xi also stressed the need for China and the EU to enhance mutual trust and understanding.
Southeast Asian leaders have criticised Myanmar's junta at an annual regional summit as it opened without a representative from the country. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations has been meeting virtually, but Myanmar's top general wasn't invited after he ignored a peace roadmap agreed 6 months ago, following the army's takeover of power in February. Ryan Meltzer reports.
Efforts to ensure that the ASEAN region rebounds swiftly from the economic impact of the pandemic should have dominated the leaders' summit. But as has happened so often before, Myanmar cast a shadow over proceedings. There was an empty square where Myanmar's representative was supposed to sit. ASEAN recently told Myanmar that its military leader could not take part, and Myanmar opted not to send a civilian representative instead. ASEAN feels Myanmar is delaying or even blocking efforts to implement a 5-point consensus agreed by all 10 ASEAN members to try to resolve that country's political crisis.
I think it's about the first step towards ASEAN becoming more assertive in trying to persuade Myanmar to revert to its elected democratic government.
On the economic front, some leaders are pushing for the creation of a regional travel bubble, with ASEAN virtually having cut itself off to foreign visitors since early last year and just cautiously reopening on a piecemeal basis.
If all ASEAN countries immediately facilitate the safe mobility of people, then the wheels of economy shall soon run again. Indonesia has also gradually reopened Bali for safe tourism, with strict health protocols.
During the ASEAN-China summit, China's Premier Li Keqiang pledged more COVID vaccines and medical equipment to help countries turn the corner in their fight against the pandemic. China has supplied some 300 million doses to the region, with countries such as Cambodia, Laos and Myanmar relying heavily on vaccines developed by China. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Kuala Lumpur.
The Turkish Lira has continued to claw back some of its recent losses after President Erdogan appeared to back down on his threat to expel 10 foreign ambassadors. The currency was trading at 9.4 to the dollar by midday in Europe after hitting a record low of over 9.8 on Monday. President Erdogan had described the diplomats as persona non grata after they signed an open letter calling for the release of the jailed leading philanthropist Osman Kavala. Well, let's talk now to Attila Yeşilard, an analyst with the group Global Source Partners. He joins us from Turkey. Welcome to the programme. Good to see you. Where has this row left Turkey's relations with the West and the country's economy?
I think the acute phase of the crisis is over, but the underlying issue of Turkey's habit of taking political prisoners will linger. I think the 10 ambassadors issued a friendly last warning to Turkey that unless Turkey improves her human rights record and Mr. Erdogan disabuses himself of the notion that he's the head of the judiciary in Turkey, sanctions will follow. Turkish economy is really in very bad shape. We are what the economists call in the middle of a weak currency, higher inflation spiral, meaning that the depreciation of the lira passes through to higher inflation, which in turn causes domestics to buy more hard currency, which pushes the dollar up.
Osman Kavala is back in court, I think, next month, and then the European Court of Human Rights says it wants him freed before then. What could happen next? Let's just look at the legal argument for a moment.
I think legally there is no dispute. Turkey's Article 90 of the Constitution states clearly that the European Court of Human Rights is the last court of appeal. It's superior domestic courts, and there has been a final verdict on that. I think Mr. Erdogan may release Osman Kavala because we have seen a precedent in 2018 when American President Trump tweeted to Turkey that unless American pastor Brunson is released, he'll bring Turkey to his knees. I think this was a more politer version of that kind of a warning. And if Osman Kavala, also there are others like former pro-Kurdish Rights Party leader, Mr. Selahattin Demirtas, if these people are not treated humanely and in accordance with the international norms of justice, Turkey will be made to suffer.
President Erdogan's AK Party is worried, of course, isn't it, about the implications of Kavala being set free. What could it mean if he is set free?
Nothing. I mean, I can understand why Erdogan refuses to set Mr. The HDP leader free, because he's a political rival. But Osman Kavala is not a political person. The whole issue here is the infamous 2013 Gezi Park riots. Erdogan has always maintained that this is not a genuine domestic uprising, but has been stoked by foreign powers. And he sees Osman Kavala as the go-between between, say, Soros and the United States interests and Turkish agitators. This has symbolic value to him, but this is also the positive side of this crisis, since it really doesn't matter on the ground in terms of votes or Osman Kavala's ability to agitate against Erdogan. I see fairly good chances that he will be released if the Western pressure continues.
Do diplomatic spats like this embolden President Erdogan domestically?
He still lives under the illusion that people care for nationalism, jingoism, foreign adventures. They did when everybody was well-fed and Turkish economy was growing at a pace of 6% per annum in real terms. Now there's widespread poverty. All the polls show that up to 75% of the participants believe the economy is in very bad shape and likely to get worse in the 12 months. No one really cares what he's trying to do with Osman Kavala or the 10 foreign ambassadors. The simple rule of politics is that you put food on my table, I'll vote for you, and Erdogan is failing that test.
Atilla Yeşilada, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
China and the United States have agreed to strengthen communication and coordination of macroeconomic policies. The message from a video call between China's Vice Premier Liu He and US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. China described the conversation as pragmatic, candid and constructive, but expressed concerns over US tariffs and treatment of Chinese companies. The US said Yellen raised issues of concern and that she looks forward to discussions in the future. Global stock markets are setting new records as earnings season is in full swing. Big tech is featuring heavily. Well, let's talk to our correspondent at the New York Stock Exchange. You've guessed it, It's John Terry. Good to see you, John.
Yes.
John, Facebook's in the headlines.
I know, and oddly enough, Facebook is the only stock, I think, in the big tech sector that is actually down at the moment. And it's really weird because we had Facebook earnings yesterday on Monday, and the line then was that they missed expectations, but the stock was up. And now the line seems to be that they beat expectations, but the stock is sharply down. Let me try to explain. It's very difficult, but let me try to explain. Essentially, the earnings per share came in at $3.22 versus $3.19, okay? So that translates to a profit this time round of $9 billion compared to 7.8 last time round. So that's good, you're right. But the rest of it was a miss. The revenue was a slight miss. The number of users was a slight miss. The forecast for the quarter going forward, the fourth quarter, that was a miss as well. And they also talked about the Apple. Remember, we talked about the iOS operating system last week, whereby people can switch off the ability for advertisers to track them. And 80% of them who have that ability are doing so. Facebook said that that was an issue for them going forward. So last night, the stock was up 2 to 3%. And I think that was because they're adding $50 billion to their stock repurchasing program. But now today, it is actually down 4% amid a big cap surge ahead of earnings later today from the likes of Microsoft. So Facebook is at the moment down a little bit. And of course, there's a lot overhanging Facebook, Juliet, as we discussed on our programme yesterday. You got Frances Haugen appearing before the UK Parliament yesterday, and she said something which is what I was trying to say yesterday. She said Facebook didn't deliberately create this polarising content on their site, but it came about as a side effect of decisions that they made, trying to please these people, trying to push the profits up. On top of that, we have a report from the AP today suggesting that the Apple people were going to chuck Facebook off the store because of its involvement or alleged involvement with the employment of maids from the Philippines and the Middle East. And, of course, we're awaiting this metaverse story, which is going to come up on Thursday when Zuckerberg is going to announce a name change for the company. He said on the call yesterday that he was going to put $10 billion into the metaverse. He also said that these documents that Frances Haugen is handing around paint a deliberately false picture of his company. But this name change is interesting because I don't think, as I said last week, they're going to change the name Facebook, Instagram or WhatsApp, but they're going to give the whole thing a new universal name, and it'll be based around the metaverse. And you say, well, what on earth is the metaverse, John? Well, I've been doing some research on this. The easiest way to think of the metaverse is basically you go inside the internet. That's what it is. At the moment, we interact on a screen like this one, and the metaverse will allow you to go into, using special equipment to go into the internet. So that's what Zuckerberg has planned. Anyway, Facebook shares down 4% now.
I would just like to remind you and our viewers that you said if Facebook do change their names, on air you said you would eat your hat. So just a little reminder out there. It's also a very big day for Tesla, isn't it?
Oh, what an incredible day. This was the other big story when we were giving the earnings yesterday, because Tesla hit $1 trillion. So that's the first car company ever to do that, ever, anywhere. And it puts it right up there with the likes of Apple and Amazon and Microsoft. Yesterday, Monday, Tesla shares were up 13%. They're now up 2%. And Elon Musk tweeted, "Wild times," with a dollar sign and the number 1 representing 1 trillion for the I. And it happened because, as we said yesterday on the programme, they were the number 1 car seller in all of Europe, beating Renault into second place in September, but also Hertz. Now, Hertz is the global rent-a-car company. It is an iconic logo. It doesn't matter what airport in the world you go to, you're going to see a Hertz sign. And Hertz is buying 100,000 Model 3s from Tesla, and it's a $4.2 billion investment, and it makes... Basically, this is going to make this the largest electric vehicle fleet in the whole of North America. 20% of Hertz's entire fleet will be Model 3 electric vehicles. I think there is a Model 3 hybrid, but they're going for the electric vehicles. They're going to increase massively the number of charging stations that they have so people can charge their cars when they rent them. And you're going to see them mostly in North America, but also, I think, in Europe sometime later in November. So very, very big day for Tesla. I mean, all the naysayers who've knocked Tesla down the years, including me from time to time, you know, this is incredible. 100,000 cars in one order. Wonderful.
John, that's what's going down here on Earth. But what's all this about Jeff Bezos building a space business park?
Well, I know, just 2 weeks after William Shatner went boldly where no actor has boldly gone boldly before, now Jeff Bezos is telling us that he's going to put a space business park, a commercial business space station up there within the next 10 years. So we're going to have the Tiangong Chinese space station, we're going to have the International Space Station, and now Amazon Prime space station, I assume. Of course, it's Blue Origin. It is a separate company. It's going to be by 2030, we're told. 10 crew. The idea is you go up there, you can film, you can do experiments, all that sort of thing. It's being built with the help of Sierra Space, which is based in Louisville in Kentucky, and Boeing, which of course is based in Chicago. And it rather leaves in the dust, I think, at least for the time being, Virgin Galactic, whose operation is kind of on hold until the end of 2022 because they're refurbishing their fleet and all that kind of stuff. Virgin shares are down 1% at the moment. Blue Origin, I don't think their shares. They don't have shares. I don't think they do anyway just yet. But yeah, an incredible story from Jeff Bezos, who does it again.
Out of this world, John, out of this world. John Terrett in New York, thank you.
Meanwhile, Heathrow Airport has warned that air travel may not recover to pre-COVID levels until 2026, despite improving passenger numbers in the last 3 months with post-lockdown pent-up demand. The company reported losing $4.7 billion since the start of the pandemic. The airport said international travel could be on the cusp of a recovery, but it faced a long road ahead.
Whitbread, the owner of UK hotel chain Premier Inn, has reported a stronger recovery than anticipated. A surge in demand across the country helped narrow the company's losses, and it said there's potential for a full recovery to pre-pandemic levels in 2022.
Mastercard is expanding its cryptocurrency offerings, announcing a partnership with digital assets platform Bakkt Holdings. The credit card giant will allow customers to buy, sell and hold cryptocurrency using a digital wallet. It will also let customers earn and spend rewards in cryptocurrency instead of loyalty points.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Protests continue on the streets as Sudan's military defends its takeover of the country.
It's the first day in Germany that vaccination centers like this one are offering a third jab.
There are fears there could be a fifth wave of COVID-19 cases.
Market watchers have a keen eye on infection rates,
safety and efficacy of COVID-19 shots.
France closed schools in the first lockdown in spring last year.
France has been a leader in vaccinating youngsters.
If a spike necessitates another lockdown,
Italy is now close to reaching its target of immunising 80% of the population over the age of 12.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Juliet Mann. Our top stories. EU ministers clash over how to rein in soaring energy prices as emergency talks end in division over what to do next.
China and the Taliban hold their first high-level talks since the group seized control of Afghanistan.
And Tesla overtakes the competition, becoming the first car maker in history to be valued at $1 trillion.
Sudan's top military general has defended the army's seizure of power, saying it was necessary to avoid civil war. Speaking at his first news conference since Monday's takeover, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan said the ousted Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok is staying with him at his own home and is unharmed.
The coup has drawn global condemnation, with the UN Security Council expected to discuss the situation later today. Michael Voss reports.
Burning tyres and roadblocks. Protesters returned to the streets for the second day running on Tuesday, closing down much of the capital, Khartoum. Crowds marching through the streets chanted, "Down with military rule, our country is civilian." The demonstrations continue despite reports of several people being killed and more injured after troops opened fire on protesters outside military headquarters. There's been widespread international condemnation after General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan dissolved the Joint Military-Civilian Sovereign Council and arrested political leaders, declaring a state of emergency. The US has frozen $700 million in aid to Sudan.
The United States condemns the actions taken overnight by Sudanese military forces. The arrest of civilian government officials and other political leaders, including Prime Minister Hamdok, undermines the country's transition to democratic civilian rule.
The United Nations also reacted swiftly, as have the European and African unions.
The unlawful detention of the Prime Minister, government officials and politicians is unacceptable and contravenes the constitutional document and the partnership critical for the success of Sudan's transition.
Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok is currently under arrest, but General Burhan says he has not been harmed.
The Prime Minister was staying at his home, but we were afraid he would be harmed. He is now staying with me at my home and is carrying on with his life normally. He will return home when the crisis is over and all the threats are gone.
The coup comes just 2 years after the country's autocratic ruler, Omar al-Bashir, was overthrown after decades in power and a joint military-civilian government created ahead of elections in 2023. Under the power-sharing arrangement, the military was due to hand over the leadership of the council to civilians in the coming weeks. It appears it didn't want to relinquish control. General Burhan blamed political infighting as the reason the military intervened. He also said the army remains committed to the transition to civilian rule. The United Nations Security Council is expected to hold an emergency session later on Tuesday to discuss the crisis in Sudan. Michael Voss, CGTN.
Well, Germany's largest and most diverse parliament has gathered for the first time since last month's election, ushering in a new era without Angela Merkel as Chancellor. Though she remains in office, Merkel's usual seat at the front of the government benches was empty, waiting to be filled by a successor yet to be named in ongoing coalition talks.
Facebook and YouTube have removed this video by the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro in which the far-right leader made a false claim linking COVID-19 vaccines with AIDS. Both companies say the video violated their medical disinformation policies. YouTube also suspended Bolsonaro from its platform for a week.
The continuing volcanic eruption on the Spanish island of La Palma is intensifying, with more than 30 earthquakes overnight. Powerful lava flows have been engulfing new areas. More than 2,000 buildings have been destroyed, and 7,000 people forced to flee since the volcano began erupting almost 6 weeks ago.
It's the stuff of fairy tales. Japanese Princess Mako has given up her royal titles to marry her college sweetheart. Under the country's law, a princess is not allowed to marry a commoner and retain her positions. although those rules do not apply to male imperial family members. The couple will live in New York City after the former princess applies for her very first passport.
The Supreme Court in the Netherlands has ruled that a collection of ancient Crimean artifacts must be returned to Ukraine. 300 objects, including a gold helmet, have been held at the museum in Amsterdam, where they've been on loan since Russia annexed the region in 2014. Ukraine's president welcomed the news as a long-awaited victory.
Protesters from a group called Animal Rebellion have scaled a UK government building in London to demand a global shift to a plant-based diet to fight climate change. They want the Prime Minister to push world leaders meeting in Glasgow next week for climate talks to address carbon emissions from farming and fishing. They're also calling on Boris Johnson to cut taxpayer support for animal agriculture.
It's more than 200 years since bison disappeared from Romania. Now, Europe's largest land mammal is being reintroduced as part of a project by the World Wildlife Fund and the Rewilding Europe Foundation. The hope is that the bison population could grow to over 250 in Romania and become self-sustaining. To see more, europe.cgtn.com.
A new trade route has opened between China and Germany with the first direct freight train service from Shanghai to Hamburg.
It comes at a critical time, with Europe's supply chain crisis showing no signs of letting up. CGTN's Ryan Thompson was there for the train's maiden journey.
Empty shelves and ports backed up for days. The signs of a supply chain crisis are becoming increasingly visible around the world. In Europe, more businesses than ever are looking to get goods into containers and get those moving around the world. But demand continues to outweigh supply, and it's threatening the entire continent's economic rebound. But new trade links are quite literally arriving at a critical time. This freight train between Shanghai and Hamburg ended its maiden voyage on Tuesday. What would have taken much longer by ship has gotten goods to Germany in half the time.
When you think about the shipping crisis going on in the sea, this can be balanced via railroad. We shouldn't forget about the time it takes to transport goods via sea, up to 6 to 8 weeks, but via railroad it can be done in 2.
With warnings that the supply chain squeeze could last for at least another year, there are calls for governments to boost investment in railways, ports, and warehouses. This train is just that and represents another link between Europe and China, on top of already existing corridors that connect the two continents.
This is not the first rail link between China and Germany. Dozens of trains already arrive weekly in North Rhine-Westphalia, carrying toys, electronics, and auto parts to Europe's largest inland port.
There are already hundreds of train connections between China and Germany. This new connection between Shanghai and Hamburg will develop, and Hamburg will play a major role in this.
In a clear sign of the desperate demand to move goods, inbound trains to Hamburg are fully booked until the end of the year. The operator says it plans to eventually expand from 1 train a week to further ease the supply chain squeeze. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Hamburg.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, how the latest technology has helped identify a rare 1,000-year-old ceramic dish from China's Song dynasty.
Hello, I'm Stephen Cole. What's on your agenda this week? I know when it comes to news, you're sport for choice. So many channels, so many opinions. But it's time to step off the news roundabout, time to cut out the noise, get to the heart of the real story with a talk show with a difference. I'll be finding out what the world is thinking by talking to the global decision makers and helping you set your own news agenda. Remember, we don't just report the news, we set the agenda.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Roger, we can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time has come, and this idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. French President Emmanuel Macron says his country will honour its promise to return 26 artworks to Benin.
The artefacts were taken during the French colonial conquest of West Africa over a century ago, and they include royal thrones, statues and ceremonial altars. Ross Cullen reports now from Paris.
In 2018, the French President Emmanuel Macron announced the restitution of the artworks to Benin. In December 2020, French MPs approved the move. They set a deadline of 12 months for the return of the objects to take place, but the French president wants that happening sooner, and we do believe that the return of the objects to the West African country is going to be taking place in the middle of November. Now, we are here at the Quai Branly-Jacques Chirac Museum in central Paris, where it is this week Benin Culture Week, and all 26 of the objects which are going to be returned are on display. They have been here in the museum's Africa collection. They include the doors from royal palaces, the thrones from royal palaces, tunics, carvings, and also these sculptures here, half man, half human, which represent the power and the importance of the monarchy.
We have never seen these works that our ancestors made before. How can you inspire others without these objects? Our grandparents were ingenious. They created beautiful works which are here and which we have never seen. But now people can come to see these objects in our museum. More visitors will come. More people will be inspired. A museum without works of art or visitors makes no sense.
As part of its colonial expansion across Africa in the late 19th century, France fought 2 wars against modern-day Benin, which was known at the time as the Kingdom of Dahomey. During the Second Franco-Dahomeyan War in 1892, the commander of French forces, General Alfred Dodds, confiscated the 26 items as the spoils of war. Now, the royal palaces at Abomey in southern Benin, which is where the French soldiers looted the items, are considered by UNESCO to be World Heritage Sites. The United Nations Cultural Agency says that the royal palaces are of great historical and cultural significance. However, there are museums such as the Louvre here in Paris, just across the other side of the French capital, and the British Museum in London, which have strongly opposed any law which would require them to send back their cultural artefacts to the countries of origin. However, critics of the West's colonial-era collections have welcomed this move of restitution by the French government. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Well, from that museum in Paris to the British Museum in London, where a ceramic dish on display has been shown to be one of the rarest types of Chinese pottery, 1,000 years old, from China's Song dynasty. The artefact was originally believed to be of Korean origin, worth nearly £7,000, but state-of-the-art forensic analysis has reassessed the stone dish, known as Ruware, as worth over $20 million.
Well, Jessica Harrison-Hall is the head of the China section at the British Museum. I asked her how suspicions first arose about the real age and real value of this dish.
A colleague, Regina Kral, was investigating Ruware in the Dresden collections in Germany. And as she was proving that this Dresden dish was a Ruware dish, she revisited the collection of the Percival David holdings, and we talked about this, and it seemed very likely that this one dish was actually another example of this very, very rare type. But to make sure, we called in the forensic scientists so that we'd have another sort of level of proof, if you like, for identifying this 1,000-year-old dish.
And why is Ruware so special and so sought after?
Well, it was really an imperial ceramic even at the time. It's incredibly rare. There are only about 100 pieces that survive in the world. And it was written about, early in the Southern Song dynasty, so already a treasure from the Northern Song. It was written about quite early in the 12th century. It's particularly special because the court fled the northern capital of Kaifeng and established their new capital in Hangzhou. And they could never really recreate these beautiful ceramics in the south, even though they tried the same technology, it's very similar potting methods and so on. But the recreation of these glazes and these ceramics sort of eluded them. And this sort of trying to recreate these early Northern Song ceramics was something which successive dynasties pursued. So all the way through the 18th century, 19th century, and even today, people try to reproduce them, but it's impossible.
It's an ancient ceramic dish, but this forensic science is bang up to date. It's cutting-edge stuff, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the scientists came in with this kind of handheld X-ray fluorescence machine and really created a fingerprint of the glaze. So they were able to match that fingerprint from the roux dish with other roux dishes and show how different that fingerprint was from that left behind by the Korean pieces. So we were 100% convinced at the end that the sort of the science and the eye united to prove that this was categorically a Ruware piece.
Is it possible to put a value on this?
Of course. I mean, within the museums, of course, we don't really value things, but in the commercial world, this makes a difference of changing from being worth perhaps £5,000 to being worth £15 million. So it makes a huge difference.
Two Hungarian friends have turned their love of coffee into a business, creating recycled products.
Working with wasted coffee grounds, the pair have spent a year building prototypes for different homewares. Penelope Lietch reports.
For many, it's a staple they couldn't live without. But coffee can do more than wake you up. Materials engineers Kinga and Esther were inspired to turn the leftover grounds into something new.
We have already made home decorations such as lampshades, but we also made jewellery like this necklace.
The grounds are dried and sorted, mixed with plant-based polymer and fed into a 3D printer. Built up over a number of days, the result is a piece made of 10% coffee grounds.
Coffee grounds have many practical uses. For example, we can use it as the pest repeller, and they can absorb undesirable odors in the fridge, for example, and they can also be used as an exfoliating agent in facial scrubs. Even so, most people just threw it out.
It was a love of coffee that brought the pair together and concern for the environment. It's estimated 18 million tonnes of wet coffee grounds end up as waste around the globe each year.
If you check your household and the environment, you can see a lot of waste. For example, from the kitchen, the waste are basically plant-based or animal-based waste, and that was my first tool. How can I to recycle these materials and this cheap and renewable, and that was the first step for my project.
The long-term focus is to create more interior products like the lampshade and to make them using other forms of kitchen waste. They hope more consumers will consider what they're throwing out and move towards recycled products.
I hope in this thing that we can change the world, and we can change our mentality, and we can change our feelings, because I am really sad that the environment is really dirty, may I say that. And the materials engineer, I have to do something.
Their next goal is to patent their idea and sell the products online. Penelope Liège, CGTN, Miskolc.
Well, here's another caffeine fix for you. Now, we know coffee can be a real pick-me-up, but one Albanian artist is taking its healing powers to a new level. Dipping his paintbrush into coffee, David Kriamati sketches portraits of his fellow drinkers. He says it's a form of therapy and puts a smile on the faces of people weary from the pandemic. No word, though, on whether they're full of beans after sitting for a portrait.
The headlines again. EU ministers clash over how to rein in soaring energy prices as emergency talks end in division over what to do next.
China and the Taliban hold their first high-level talk since the group seized control of Afghanistan.
And Tesla overtakes the competition, becoming the first car maker in history to be valued at $1 trillion.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.